5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
All right, we just got through with Independence Day yesterday. So if you're a patriot, woohoo, let's go. We just made it through 245 years as our own nation. And today we got Ruel Mannette. He just returned into the absurd to shoot the shit with me on Eastern philosophy and phenomenology. Hopefully we'll get into a little Sartre, and I was going to start off with a little Tao Te Ching quote. So how are you, Ruel?
I'm doing pretty good, and thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, no problem.
Good to be here.
So what's your opinion of independence, maybe in a personal sense?
In a personal sense, well, I really think the the idea of America is a really important thing and really good, and I really want to work towards that. And so I think that kind of this is like Independence Day offers such a good opportunity to kind of rethink those moments in which like certain ideals of like freedom and justice and so forth are like we're able to like really think through those. And so I think it's a great holiday for that, for sure. And some celebration.
Yeah. I think it deserves some celebration, but also just a little bit like remembrance, like, hey, like freedom's not free, but also like we definitely have a long ways to go before before everyone in our country is like independent and they're free, and that and before our country truly lives by the ideals of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
whatever that means.
Yeah, no, for sure. Which requires some interpretation, but it's like I feel like it's like maybe like any sort of like project of the self. It's a project that is like always being worked on. Always moving in a direction. It's never already there. So I think that's the other thing to always keep in mind, for sure. So yeah, no, I totally agree.
Cool. Well, I'll read that quote. I think you cannot minimize Zoom when you're recording this meeting, but okay, so I'll have to like stop the recording and then start back up somehow. So
dang. Okay.
I'll do that. Or I'll stop it. I'll like copy and paste what I was going to read into the chat, and then should be able to work.
Oh, that sounds good for me.
All right. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, we're back. All right. Yeah. After just a few seconds. Okay. When the greatness of the Tao is present, action arises from one's own heart. When the greatness of the Tao is absent, action comes from the rules of kindness and justice. If you need rules to be kind and just, if you act virtuous, this is a sure sign that virtue is absent. Thus we see the great hypocrisy. When kinship falls into discord, piety and rites of devotion arise. When the country falls into chaos, official loyalists will appear. Patriotism is born.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah, I guess that kind of ties into the Independence Day thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a good kind of aphorism passage for sure as well too.
Yeah, when chaos arises, patriotism is born. Right. I mean, that's kind of what I picked out of that. Right.
Yeah. I was really thinking about the kind of the beginning part.
Yeah.
Where it's like, could you read just like the first two sentences again? Because those are the ones.
Yeah. Because have you read Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of that sort of essence. When the greatness of the Tao is present, action arises from one's own heart. When the greatness of the Tao is absent, action comes from the rules of kindness and justice.
Yeah, no, because I'm really thinking about how, I don't know, it's very much this like, if everything is working well, there's no need
Yeah.
to kind of develop these kind of rule systems. I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost like you got to kind of almost like a critique of Kantian ethics in there, right?
Yeah.
It's like the fact that you need this kind of like complex, rule-oriented way of action means that like the rest of the world is already being messed up in a certain way.
Yeah, why do we need rules to be good or evil?
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
why do we need someone to tell us what's good or evil when, like, come on, like, are we really that dumb that we can't know what's good or evil, like, for ourselves? I don't know.
No, for sure.
But
I feel like there's almost, yeah. No, I agree, but there's also like a way in which it kind of goes beyond, or I don't know if it goes beyond Nietzsche, but that's you can't really do that, you know. It's Nietzsche,
Yeah.
but there's like a certain way it's going in another direction as well too, because it is saying you can have the rules, but when the rules are arising, that's a problem. Like the very arising of the rules is an issue in itself, which I mean, you could also kind of see that in certain, especially, I mean, that's definitely in Nietzsche as well, but in a very different kind of way, I feel like.
Yeah, well, in a sense, I mean, rules kind of make us like evil sometimes. I mean, it's good to have rules. Yeah. I mean,
sure.
You know, I'll go back on my previous statement. Maybe like rules aren't all that bad. At least, you know, we should probably teach people to like wash their hands and stuff like that when they're in school, and just like basic, you know, stuff that just makes our society better. But what was I saying? Is
yeah, but like in a certain way, it's like that you have to make those rules for something means that like people aren't already doing them themselves, right? And I think that's kind of that's his problem right there.
Yeah.
That, like if you have to be telling someone to do something, that means it's not already happening, which means maybe there is a problem.
Yeah, and
I don't know. I'm very much like almost thinking Rousseau here, right?
We're what?
I'm very much like almost thinking Rousseau, like kind of like the earlier state of nature, and that, you know, everyone's getting along, and then you kind of build this society, and the society is now giving people all these like ways to behave that's kind of messing things up.
Yeah, I mean have you read Ishmael?
Oh no, I don't think I'm familiar with that.
Shoot. Yeah, well, you're familiar with the Genesis and the
okay,
and
yeah,
like
for sure.
Eve picking from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and
definitely,
yeah. I mean, when I mean, that's like one of the oldest stories ever told. Like, you know, it came from like way before the Bible was even thought of or conceived of. You know.
Yeah.
And I mean, what's that story telling us? It's like it's telling us that once we develop the knowledge of good and evil, like we were fried. Like that was the end of our like innocence. Like life forever on was torturous, basically.
Sure. Yeah. And that one's always a difficult one, right? Because it's like, in a certain way, it's like I don't know if I want to kind of penalize like this a curiosity or search for knowledge.
Yeah.
That kind of story. I feel like has undergirding it. But at the same time, I can also see kind of like some of the Taoist critique in what you were reading before, and I can see certain ways how it links up too. So yeah, obviously a kind of tricky river to navigate, tricky way.
Yeah, it all is. So what do you think this quote is like really telling us in the Tao?
Well, I mean, and this is part of what I think a lot of kind of Taoism trying to get at as well. It's like, you know, it's like that kind of classic image of you know, someone going down a river, and they're trying to like steer the ship and trying really hard, and they're like fighting the current, and it's making so much effort, so much more work, and it's not really getting them there. And it kind of like this, the best way to kind of be navigating this would be to, you know, the Wu Wei, like going like the non-action, the active non-action, and I think that's kind of very much what I feel like it's getting at here. It's like that this world that needs these rules, that needs this kind of constructions is the very world that's not functioning. It's not. You're band-aiding a broken vessel in a certain way. And I think that's kind of what it's really trying to get at. But I mean, at the same time, it's like I always never think that there's like, you know, one, especially with this is from the Tao Te Ching, right? It's like especially like with every one of these sections from there, it's like there's always multiple levels of meaning, and I feel like it's like each one is conveying like maybe like 6-7 different things at once.
And I think it's important to think that like rules are important, but you're right. If we have to like make more rules, then there's probably some underlying issue that we haven't like solved yet.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Because then things really aren't following the way, right? Because the way ideally would be like everything is kind of working in a degree of harmony, and so to try to achieve a state like that, can it be done through like more complicated, long bureaucratic rule processes? I don't know, but at the same time, it's like I think one of the things I think that at least this quote was getting at too is that there's a double-edged sword though, because you still like when things aren't working, you still need the kindness and justice. You still need to try to fix what's going on when it's not even in the broken state. And so I feel like that also helps. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to equivocate it to like an Augustinian concept of original sin though, because I feel like that would kind of bring in some sort of like some metaphysics and kind of maybe like concepts that like this isn't fixable, this isn't handleable, that I think would never have been there. And maybe sorry.
And it's also more of a like with like the Tao. I mean, that's more of like a general statement that's kind of like, this kind of happens in cycles. Like sometimes there's more rules, sometimes there's less. It's kind of an in and out, ebb and flow kind of deal.
I think that's a good point to bring up too, right? Because this is like it's an aspect of a lot of like kind of like, I mean, different kind of philosophies of history, but like I think it's important to recognize not everyone's kind of dealing with like this kind of Hegelian Condorcet linear history, right? Because it's like you got like the Arab philosopher Ibn Khaldun kind of had the same thing with this like ideas of cyclical histories, and I think you definitely get this in classic China with the I Ching, as well. It's like these like notions of like a rising and falling and like degrees of balance. So I think that's also totally at play here. There's that kind of philosophy of like a not necessarily cyclical history, but like a history in spirals or something, not like something that's just like a train going through time.
Well, it's that classic like history repeats itself, And it does time and time again.
But I definitely agree. But it's like it always repeats itself too. I feel like, I mean, this, at least personally, with like a degree of difference. It's the same thing, but it's also always slightly different at the same time. Just like this, like that's why I like spiral or whatever. It's like we're hitting the same point, but like somehow we're also at a different point.
Yeah, well, that kind of reminds me of the Earth's rotation around the sun, right? I mean.
Okay, that's a good metaphor.
We're always like rotating in the same way around it, but the whole position of the sun and the Earth is in a completely different place.
No, definitely.
Thousands of light years away from like the last place that they were.
For sure.
So it's like, I mean,
spinning on spinning.
We're like spinning, but we're also like moving through time. So it's we're like moving through space or whatever.
Space.
However you want to, if you want to use the analogy or be literal here, but and so I was actually I saw this interesting critique of the Tao on a poster in my grandma's garage.
Okay, I'm down for this. Like, let's do some poster philosophy. Grandma's garage poster philosophy.
So it said, I posted on my Instagram, but it said following the path of least resistance is what makes rivers run crooked.
Interesting.
I'm like,
that's a good aphorism. Yeah, no, I like that.
I'm like, shoot, well, that is, but that's where we start to confuse laziness with following the path of least resistance.
Yeah, and I do think, like I said, like it's because it's like, especially with like the Tao Te Ching, the kind of way that it almost seems to be advocating. Obviously, it's like a cryptic book in certain ways. And my Chinese definitely isn't up to snuff to be able to like fully get all the nuances here. But I do think it's like part of it is it requires a degree of active attention to be able to put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
That I think is not just there when you're just like, oh, I'm just going to roll along with the hill, right? It's a kind of active non-activity, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think at least to some extent. But I know I like that quote because I think that gets at if I don't know, ancient Chinese scholars might disagree with me here, but maybe like a way of like positioning Zhuangzi against Lao Tzu, if that makes sense, like the Tao Te Ching versus Zhuangzi's work.
Okay.
Because I feel like in certain ways it is almost like that's kind of what's being advocated in the Tao Te Ching. Even if it's an active non-activity, it's still about this kind of non-activity, which I think is there in Zhuangzi. But it's like he's also got some of these metaphysical critiques that I think would be able to push back against something like that.
So I actually have
this idea that the river is.
I haven't read any Zhuangzi. Could you kind of give a brief summary of his work?
Sure. Oh gosh, now you're gonna give me some. I'm gonna mess up the dates here. Probably like
that's right.
200 BC ish.
Okay.
Chinese philosopher. Like the next big guy in Taoism, or at least Taoism is it kind of becomes later constructed. And he wrote this book called just Zhuangzi. And he's got the inner chapters and the outer chapters. He discusses, he's not just talking about like Taoism, because he also, Confucius is a character. He's got some dialogues with some of the Chinese logicians in there. So it's a pretty fun book, and it spans quite a bit. But I was just going to bring up, he's got some things in there, and the really famous one. It's like, oh, how do I know I'm not he's got almost this Cartesian kind of question at one point where he's like, how do I know I'm not a butterfly dreaming? That's like one of the most famous sections from the inner chapter, I think chapter 2. But I think
check that out.
Yeah, no, totally, for sure. He's great. But I was just going to bring up, there's one part of it where he's talking about, I think it's like boxing in life, or like that, like everything doesn't always fit in like squares, and that, like, you kind of have to like, you're like, oh, it's always like you're always kind of having to build outside of that, and like it never really works. And I feel like that's one of the, like, you can't enclose everything in this way, because of the way that like you can enclose it all really isn't the way. And it's like one of those things where it's like, I feel like in some of his work, he kind of gets at a critique like this. Like it like the fact that you're even implying that you need a straight river in the first place is kind of missing the point. Like, why does it's like that something should be like, that there is this correct thing that matches my categories and my concepts. And then I think you're already, when you're applying your kind of categories and concepts to the world, you're kind of failing in a certain way. And I think that's kind of like that kind of Zhuangzi Taoism that I think that like you might not have in the Tao Te Ching, if I can position them against each other. if because going against the counter narrative that would see them all as a continuous thing. But it's like it's the cycles and the circles again too, right? It's new but with difference. I don't know. Yeah,
well, like a straight river is like ugly. It's always man-made. It's like made of concrete. It's like
you're totally
I don't want to look at that.
No, I mean, it's a canal.
It's a canal for ships to like basically come through, and there's a bunch of gasoline in it, and it doesn't really support life very well like a normal river. Sure. So it sucks, man. Straight rivers are terrible.
I like the aesthetic critique then, because it's like right off the bat you're like, well, actually, no, that wouldn't look good. Because that's like, that's spot on too, for sure.
Well, I mean, what does that mean though? I mean, like if you're like a straight and narrow kind of person, like, oh, it must be this way, it must be done that way, like it can't be done this way, like, they don't even think about it, they've just been doing what they've been told their whole life.
Sure.
And it's like, I mean, that's just no way to live, at least for me. But
well, I'm just also thinking that maybe like like the person that wants to impose like a specific way of seeing the world on everybody else, right? It's like the same kind of person that would like be valuing this kind of straight river in a certain way. It requires a degree of like a syntheticness. It requires a degree of like you're fighting, you're imposing a will on nature. You're kind of like imposing a way that we should be going. It's not always very pretty, and I don't know. Maybe like a degree of conceptual violence there too, if that makes sense.
Conceptual violence.
Yeah, it's like you have to like force everything into this like a specific orientation.
That's cool, dude. You should like write a book about that, like Conceptual Violence by Ruel Mannette.
Oh yeah, all right. I mean, I'm not opposed. That could be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that term before. Like, I think you just like made that up just now. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely borrowing from some ideas here, right? I don't know if I've like heard it as a specific term before, but I'm definitely getting some ideas from like, at least in a certain maybe like Derrida, like certain like ways of like speaking or seeing the world that is kind of like imposing away on others. And I think so. At least I'm borrowing some ideas from that. It's not wholly my. I mean, that's like not wholly my original philosophy, but it's like how much of any of this is. It's always like it's always repeating to a certain extent, and it's also making something slightly new too.
Yeah. No, that reminds me of Ishmael again. I bring it up like on most of my podcasts. I'm like, because like people come up with this, they always at one point we start talking about like imposing ideas on other people.
Oh yeah, is this a common theme? I like this.
You gotta read Ishmael, and then but no one's read it. No one's read it yet. I'm like, what?
Well, it's gonna get popular off your show though.
Yeah, I hope so. I let my teacher who I had on the podcast, I let him borrow it. So
yeah,
I'm waiting to hear back from him on what he thinks about it, and then eventually, once he's done reading it, hopefully I could have someone to talk about it on the podcast with.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely check it out too because it sounds interesting.
Yeah, no, it's kind of about like this gorilla that can talk, and he's basically like this monk to this guy that like walks in, and then he's like, oh wait, you're a gorilla? I thought you'd be a person. And he's like, well, whatever. And then he starts explaining to him like how our society has basically been like destroyed because, well, like the world is being destroyed by all of humanity's like quote unquote progress, and how we've basically done this by imposing the idea that we need to use as much stuff as possible upon like everything. So
that's good. No, I very much like the kind of the critique of progress idea, because I feel like that's not necessarily, it's just kind of like a tacit assumption in like a lot of just general discourse about all sorts of things. Yeah,
I mean, we like, sure, maybe we progressed in some ways, but but if progression is, leading us into a hole where we die, that sounds like progress to me.
Yeah, it's like how good of for sure, like how good of a progress is if like the car's driving off a cliff. It's like I'm really making good time here, but like there is a cliff at the end. Because I also think I think it's worth discussing too with like I think it's about these areas too, because I think I'm totally accepting that we can make, obviously, like we could make progress in a certain area. It's like, oh, okay, we like, you clearly make progress and you build a building. Like, there is a kind of concept where you're like, okay, if you're not progressing on this construction, this building, you haven't progressed. And then when the building's complete, okay, you've progressed. So I'm totally down with there being pockets of like progression. I think what I think is philosophically suspect is kind of when we progress in certain directions and then everything then becomes along for the ride. Like that somehow they were all tied into that. And because we've done it in one direction, it's therefore implied we've done it in all directions. And I don't think that's the case. That's why the French philosopher Condorcet, I think he was killed in the French Revolution. But one of his big things was like, oh, well, it's like, well, we're forgoing in one, we're progressing in science. We're also progressing in everything else. And we'll just reach this period where we've all progressed in everything. It's like as if this is a necessary fact of reality. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of slightly philosophically suspicious.
And I feel like there needs to be some sort of a goal or like a shared goal for progress to even exist.
I think that's always a good point too. Yeah, for sure. Because it's like, if you don't have an agreement on what you're trying to, if you're both trying to build a house and you both know you're building a house, but you don't have, you're both following different blueprints. There's no way that this house is going to be functioning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Because if someone's trying to like do like this like some neo Gothic house and you're just trying to build like a ranch style, it's just,
Yeah.
they're all messed up.
Yeah, one weird looking house at the end, that's for sure.
Well, hopefully, I mean, at least, and that would be if you guys can both get your like worldviews together to make an agreement. Otherwise, it's going to collapse. It's not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see that though, like a Gothic ranch house. You know,
I mean, I'd be very if two people could do that and like come together and actually work on that. That'd be a very cool synthesis for sure.
Hey, well, we probably both know some architects from college, right?
Yeah. Hit one of them up.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, but like that's kind of happening a lot just like around the world where like, we all want to make, well, maybe we don't all want to make humanity happy. A lot of people just want to make themselves happy. And most of the people that want to make themselves happy are the ones that have the most power.
Sure.
So I guess it's shoot. Yeah. So it's kind of a bad situation, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's like, I mean, the discussion of happiness, I feel like it's still also fairly underdeveloped, right? Because there's a lot of I mean, who is it that with Nozick, I think is like the classic, like the pleasure machine, or it's like where you just like sit there, you're hooked up, and it's like, oh, everything feels good, but you're really just like, I don't know, something like his like, I don't know, you're just like hanging out and everything's okay. It's like, I don't know, it's like feels good, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're happy.
I think they have like stuff like that already. That's like built. Yeah, they have like a an orgasm thing where like it hooked up to the part of your brain that can feel that, and then like you can just press a button and then it just. And I think they tested it out. I don't know. I'd have to do a fact check, but
did you ever read? This is, if you haven't, it's fine. But do androids dream of electric sheep? Philip K. Dick's book. It's like the one Blade Runner is based off of.
No, but tell me about it.
All right. Well, I mean, if you've seen Blade Runner, that's mostly the main arc of the story. There's just this fun thing that they have that Phil K. Dick also added in the book, where they all have these like wrist things that they just like dial in whatever mood they want to be feeling.
Oh, okay.
That moment.
Yeah.
And it's so like he'll get in a fight with his wife, and they're like, they both don't want to deal with it, so they're both just like happy, and then they just like, oh, we're happy now, and they like go about it. But it's just like it's always this like faux kind of chemical happiness, right? It's like
and the problem isn't solved.
Yeah, no, not at all. There's no underlying resolution of like this human relationship. This is I mean, it's a very mechanistic way of understanding kind of human relations. I feel like that like that we're just chemicals, or that we're just that we're just certain combinations of impulses and stimuli. It's all. Yeah. I don't know, maybe too much Hume. I don't know.
No, not at all. But it reminds me of like, like you forget to take the trash out and then you decide, you know what, I'm just going to bury it in my lawn. Why not?
No, for sure.
Nothing bad's going to happen. There's not going to be a sinkhole or anything.
Yeah. Well, that would be really whack if you did that, right? Well, I mean, no, I think it's definitely a similar model though, right? It's just like, okay, here's a Band-Aid fix.
Yeah. But yeah, on the like we're just like our whole body is basically just like drugs, like shooting off and reacting.
Sure. Well, that's what I think is right where the phenomenology comes in too, though, right? It's like, where's our starting point? Is our starting point kind of an abstraction about how we're going to think about ourselves? Like, do we just handle our body the same way we're like trying to handle like a puzzle or something? It's like, okay, or is it something, it's a very different that we're like kind of starting from this position. We're starting about how we feel about the world, and then we're kind of building from there. Because if we're starting about how we feel about the world, then it's like thinking about ourselves just like a complicated kind of test tube experiment. It doesn't seem very functional. It makes perfect sense in along certain, how do I say this? So like Husserl's got this idea of attitudes, like a naturalistic attitude, and these other kind of, it's just like a way that you can look at the world and like think about how it's going on. So like the naturalistic attitude is like that kind of conventional. It's like, okay, I'm watching causes and effects and just trying to map out where they're going. And there's another one, like the psychical attitude, which is kind of like, okay, now I'm thinking about it, how I'm thinking about things. And you're like kind of processing how your thoughts are working, and how your thoughts interact with each other is a whole different way of understanding how things could interact than like watching billiard balls, for example. And so I think that's like, I think that's kind of that we could have different ways, attitudes of looking at the world. And I think the attitude that we are just like complicated, you know, interactions of drugs and chemicals is totally valid. And I mean, you really need it for aspects of medical science, for example, but it's like, it has limitations for like we shouldn't always be beginning here or that's not, because it's like because you have to recognize all these different ways we also look at the world, all these different other attitudes to it. I don't know.
I mean, I think, I mean, we're not just like, I think there's a whole like interplay or like interchange of ways that our bodies and our minds work together to form the experience that we have.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's not just one thing, you know, we're not just chemicals and we're not just like a soul or whatever. We're like some mix of somethingness. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is too, it's like sometimes those perspectives that we need to take too, maybe don't always mesh together, right? It's like we might not always, I think it's like object oriented ontology where they try to create like, oh, I can make this map of everything. Yeah. It's like, you know, maybe we can't really all map this all out. We just have to recognize that there's some blinders here. We just have to look at it from our different kind of perspectives and how it's going on.
Yeah. And I don't think, I don't think it necessarily matters if two ideas contradict each other.
Sure.
Just because we're having the assumption that our logic is so perfectly related to the reality of the universe that contradictions are impossible, right? In reality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think, getting into the discussion of logic, I think that's a pretty good statement, because it's like this idea that there's like perfect correlation between logic and reality, like some sort of Bertrand Russell Leibniz kind of worldview. I think is definitely it's not necessarily functional. It doesn't necessarily make sense, because it's like you have to take it like, I mean, this is again with like Husserl, we kind of begin from this phenomenological experience. We have to build up to this mathematics into the logic here, and so it's like it doesn't necessarily just like, it's not going to be like this like perfect kind of a priori correlate, because it's like you have different logics develop as well. I mean, like Aristotle's logic's clearly very different from like Bertrand Russell's logic, or logic in Nagarjuna in ancient India. Whole different system.
So I haven't heard anything about the logic in ancient India. Can you like elaborate, or do you think you'll be able to?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, it's a little bit harder. I mean, it's like a whole. So ancient India had like, well, just briefly to sum it, the Astika and the Nastika, two like orthodox and unorthodox kind of philosophical areas of Buddhism, Jainism, Charvak, some of like other less famous ones were all like unorthodox. And then you had the orthodox ones, which just were the only difference is like, oh, we're following the Vedas. And of those is where like you get a lot of the famous schools of philosophy. So there's 6 major ones. The most famous probably is Advaita Vedanta, or Vedanta in general, and then you have different kinds of Vedanta. One of them was Nagaya, and they were just basically logicians, and so they developed this whole philosophical school basically on logic. And then Buddhism, because it's ancient India, so there's discussions between the groups. So Buddhism also is in dialogue with them. So that's what Nagarjuna is. He's probably the most famous kind of Buddhist logician. And I think like basically the big thing is like one of the big differences they kind of, at least the most relevant one to bring up in how they developed logic, was that at least Nagarjuna in his stuff was accepting of the possibility of contradiction. And he kind of develops. Oh gosh, I'm gonna try to remember this. I don't know if I can do this off the top of my head, but there's like basically 4.
It's okay if you butcher it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna butcher this. But basically, there's like kind of 4 things like I could think could be. It could be like it is not, and it is not, and it is, and it is not, and it is not. It's like if that makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
it's like a positive, a negation, it's like double. Yeah, it's like a positive negation, like a positive and negation, and then like a double negation. And it's like those are the four. So like he allows for those four possibilities, and then obviously that builds a very different kind of logic. But it works pretty well for like I mean, when he's trying to get to like understanding nirvana and understanding like the concept of a not self. Yeah, I totally probably butchered that. I apologize, Nagarjuna.
So wait, so I think it makes sense. It's kind of like one of those like four squared charts where you got it is not, then it is not, then they go together like in four little squares.
And I believe basically.
Oh yeah, cool.
I mean, I think that's one of his big things, because I think part of it was like, so I don't think that's not in Nyaya, and so part of it I think was him trying to like build a logical defense of Buddhism against that kind of orthodox Indian school.
Yeah. Correctly. Yeah, and
so I think that's
what.
Well, I mean, this is kind of it's going in kind of exactly in the direction you were kind of wanting here. It's like it's getting rid of this idea from Leibniz that you keep, like Leibniz is like, okay, contradiction destroys the whole thing. Your logic's done when it contradicts itself.
Yeah,
you can't let this happen. And so like I feel like Nagarjuna is like this is the polar opposite here. It's like he allows for this whole possibility of contradiction, and he's like specifically arguing for it pretty rigorously.
Well, do you think contradiction and non-contradiction could be compatible with each other?
Sure. I mean, it's like I think kind of going back into our earlier discussion on the logic with the correlation for the world, I think that's the problem. It's like if you think your logic is just going to map up to the whole world, because I think it makes perfect sense to delineate, let's say, a small set of things, and like for example, like a board game, like chess or checkers or something. We have rules. And if there's a contradiction in the rules, like something, then the chess game doesn't work. So we have to figure that out. So it's like I think it's totally acceptable to not allow contradiction, say, in a chess game. But it's like that doesn't mean that the whole reality has to function along the lines of a chess game. That the logic that applied to the specific game doesn't necessarily apply to other games. So you could totally have contradictions in just like how other things are working without necessarily have it with still like having spaces of non-contradiction, if that makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like every game has its own rules.
Yeah exactly.
And if you're playing two games at the same time, that doesn't, that might be in a sense a contradiction. No, for sure. It's like it would only be a problem if you'd like tried to map them onto each other, though, if you let them both exist. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of what is happening here in a lot of sense. I mean, to tie it back to your like two blueprints idea, right?
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of times people are playing two different games.
Yes. Yeah. But it's like there's a way in which, but if you took both pieces and you're like, well, I'm now going to play checkers with chess pieces, that can still totally work. It's just like you can have to kind of come to this kind of discursive agreement about what's going to happen before it's kind of going on. Because the problem is like if you're doing that and then your opponent's like, well, now I'm just playing chess, and it's like, no, like
no, man, we're like I thought we were going to play checkers. Come on.
Yeah. It's like you can work together. I mean, I think you could even have a chess game where you're like, all right, but now the pawns function like checker pieces. Like I think you can fuse the things together, but I think there has to be like an equal fusing like for both parties. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, I mean, that's kind of the idea of like compromise.
Yeah, sure.
Why it's important to compromise with people.
But it also, I think it adds a degree of creativity. Like it's like, like by forcing games to always like only follow the rules and never allowing a possibility of new games to develop would also be like, I feel like you kind of need degrees of compromise to be able to create new things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be like a declaration of bankruptcy on like human creativity, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
Like No, you bring up a really good point there where if you kind of just say, no, I'm playing this game forever. I'm not playing any other games. I'm not playing any other way. Get out of here. You're like completely just not allowing, like you're not opening your heart to like creativity, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You're staying on that straight river and you're not floating down the crooked one.
No, for exactly. Yeah. No, go just right back to the river. I completely agree.
Yeah.
For sure.
Or at least maybe you think that the crooked river is crooked or so.
This is too crooked for me. I need only my ranch style, only my chess game with my straight canal.
Yep. I won't have any of that gothic stuff in my life. Get it out of here. I don't want your gargoyles. Yeah. I don't know, man, but that kind of
gargoyles on a ranch style would be very interesting house.
What?
I was just saying gargoyles on a ranch style would be a very interesting house.
Yeah, well, but it kind of reminds you of those like Skinwalker Ranch, stuff like that. Like if that was gothic, then that'd be like so creepy, but it'd fit.
Yeah, actually, no, you're right. You're totally right.
Have you heard of Skinwalker Ranch?
Just a little bit from I think it was like I'd seen it from some friend or something.
Yeah, well, I actually want to talk to you about like phenomenology as it relates to like paranormal activity.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm down.
I don't know if you've given it any thought, but like if you were someone that, like you saw a UFO, like, or like something weird, right? Like you saw like let's say you lived at Skinwalker Ranch and you walked outside and you saw a wolf and you're like, oh God, it's a wolf. He's going to kill my family. So you like pull out your pistol and you like start shooting it, but it's bulletproof. And you're like, oh no. And then it starts walking away and then it walks into a portal.
It's like some sort of like H.P. Lovecraft or something.
Yeah. And supposedly this happened at Skinwalker Ranch.
Okay. I thought I heard something. It was like UFOs or something. All right. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm down.
So where would you start in trying to investigate? You're like before that happened, you totally thought that you were a normal person that didn't hallucinate and that you were like perfectly sane. But then that happened and now you're like, okay, so where do I start to investigate my the experience that I just saw?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, right? So if we're going to deal with the paranormal, I think phenomenology would be a good place because it's like that's kind of, I mean, it's the individual that literally just experienced this. So this is like kind of the best way to approach this situation while taking them seriously, but also allowing the possibility for them not matching up with other people's conceptions of what's going on. Husserl had a big thing about, like, I mean, one of the best, like, good ways to handle this, like, why Husserl's one works is like he has a big thing about like intersubjectivity. And so you need these kind of other subjectivities to kind of also help map and understand your experience. Okay. And so it's like clearly in a situation like that where there isn't this other possibility that also makes things a little more complicated. I don't know how exactly how to handle that. There is like a stream, let's say, with like I don't know if I'd call Bergson a phenomenologist, but like and William James the same way. But both of them were very interested in, like, let's say, ghosts and stuff.
Yeah.
Like William James would do like seances and stuff.
Really?
Founder of American psychology.
Wow.
Writes the first textbook on psychology, and also would do seances.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And this is one of his things was like, because that's what he writes in his varieties of religious experience, was just trying to trust, like, beginning from that kind of empirical evidence of every individual's direct experience of what's going on, and then trying to map it out from there. And I think that's kind of what you'd have to do with this situation. I think you'd have to take what they're saying seriously, but I think taking what they're saying seriously doesn't necessarily, well, I guess now I'm still looking at it from my perspective, but taking what they're saying seriously doesn't necessarily mean that we have to like buy into like a more complicated like metaphysics of what's going on. Like for example, if someone sees like some sort of like experiences a demon attacking them, that doesn't necessarily imply the existence of demons, but that doesn't mean that their experience wasn't also valid necessarily. We could try to still intersubjectively try to work out a world in which they both can exist.
Yeah, because Well, I mean, what's happening is that like someone who sees like a bulletproof wolf and shoots at it,
Yeah.
and then it goes into a portal. I mean, they had that experience. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, no,
like,
that's
it happened to them.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know, like what? But you know, it takes other people to get involved and to take that person seriously to actually like come to like what actually happened. What was the reality? What were they experiencing really?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if like, yeah, no, I agree, and I don't know if it's always about, yeah. So I guess I think like there might be certain ways in which like something would just be unexplainable, right? Because there's definitely certain weird natural phenomena sometimes with like rocks and stuff that was just like, oh, like I don't know, we just don't have enough data to actually be able to try to come up with a good map of what's going on in that situation. Obviously, bulletproof wolves and portals, a whole other level of stuff going on. But I don't know if we could come up with an easy explanation there. But at the same time, it's like you can still like apply Occam's razor in certain cases, right? It's like, okay, well, just because this individual had this experience doesn't necessarily mean that we now have to like be concerned that portals with wolves and bulletproof wolves are going to be popping up all over the planet. It doesn't necessarily imply that.
Yeah. I've heard that term before. Could you like explain Occam's razor again for me?
Yeah, Occam's razor is just like it's like a virtue of simplicity. It's like whatever is the easy, like whatever is the simplest explanation is probably the best explanation.
Okay.
Obviously not always the case, but like a really good example was so when like Copernicus was going against Ptolemy and like developed his whole map of the solar system, and he puts the sun at the center, not the earth. It's radical. It's philosophically different, and it works slightly better than Ptolemy's astronomy. But one of the big problems with Copernicus is he had these things called epicycles. So because he was trying to map out where the planets are going, and they would so in his map of the solar system, everything has to be perfect circles. So it makes it really complicated. So all these little planets are like still bouncing around in little circles around each other. So it's like it worked better than Ptolemy just because Copernicus had new data and stuff, but it wasn't nearly as radical yet because it's just conceptually radical. It's not necessarily like a really good model at predicting it. And it's Kepler that develops is like, well, maybe the planets are going in ovals. And now this is and because they're going in ovals, that's a simpler explanation than having to posit all these different tiny circles.
Yeah.
To account for basically the planets in like retrograde. And so like that, the fact that we could go in ovals here, that makes it a much better explanation. It's a simpler explanation. That fact that things are in ovals and we have like, it's easier to posit, like how many planets are at this time? Like, eight heavenly bodies going in 8 ovals rather than like than 20, 30, 40. I don't remember how many circles Copernicus needed. And so that's kind of like the Occam's razor. It's just like the simpler explanation. Like if I'm driving down the street and there's a car that has a big dent in the side, the guy's like all freaked out, and I come outside and he's like, oh, it's like there's 2 people in the car, let's say, and then like one of them's like, oh, this other car came by, hit me, and drove off. And the other person's like, no, it was this giant golden ram that appeared, smashed my car, and then flew off with like Brad Pitt riding it or something, right? And you're like, Occam's razor is like, okay, the person that thought it was the car is probably right here. The simpler explanation makes more sense. There's too much I have to take into account to believe that there's like golden bulls and somehow Brad Pitt is riding them around.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it usually is a simpler explanation.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's like you have to take Occam's razor with a grain of salt because sometimes things do end up being more complicated than they, could have been. But as a general rule of reasoning, I think it's pretty good because, most of the time, it's like it's the simpler explanation is probably the better one.
Yeah, it's like what my dad always told me. It's like, hey, Greg, just use your instincts, man. Like, if you come up with a bad situation, just use your instincts. They're usually right most of the time.
Yeah. Well, but this is exactly, I think this is getting at that critique of Occam's razor too, though, right? Because there's times where it's like your instincts were totally off, right?
Mm.
Or like this explanation was way more complicated.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking one off the top of my head, but there's definitely, those are kind of occurrences.
Yeah, like, well, I mean, why does I mean, like what's happening, like the sun, like, you know, people are like, oh,
Sure.
the sun's on fire. No,
Yeah.
there can't be fire on the sun because there's no oxygen. That's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a giant ball of nuclear fusion, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. And like, that's a situation where like Occam's razor would have failed.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because it's like, oh, it's heat. Okay, well, the best explanation is, yeah, it's on fire. It's like, it doesn't necessarily work. No, for sure. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's definitely those kind of cases.
yeah, like, no, there's actually these really small balls that you can't see, that make up everything in the whole universe. And if you bounce them together really fast and with enough heat and pressure, they will explode bigger than anything you could possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. Now that's pretty complex.
No, for sure.
I don't think anyone would have believed that.
No. But at the same time, it's like it still works in other situations, right? It's just something like, let's say with like multiverse theory, right? Yeah. The idea that there has to be like an infinite number of universes, that's adding an infinite level of complexity. And maybe that isn't the best example there. I mean, I know the math might work out, but it helps explain things like cleaner, but that's one that hella goes against Occam's razor, like literally to an infinite degree. So
but the thing is, like, how good is math at describing the physical universe? I mean, it's pretty good, but sure. Can it describe everything? Can it prove everything?
Yeah. No, I think that's also a legitimate question, right? Because that's porting in some certain, let's say, philosophical biases of like Plato, Galileo, Descartes. Yeah. Just like this way of trying to like map everything into mathematics, which was totally which totally worked. We're like totally way some of these guys saw the reality, what's going on. But that doesn't mean like we don't all have to be Platonists or like Cartesians. Yeah. You gotta balance it out with Francis Bacon, and he's just like, his empiricism.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever read Being in Nothingness?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. It's a big book. I've not.
Oh yeah, dude, I haven't even started it. I'm scared. Yeah. Just because it's so long.
I do want to get through all of it. But I've read quite a few sections. It's pretty good. I mean, I don't think Sartre's too bad a writer. I think he can be kind of fun in his approaches and stuff.
Yeah, I still haven't read Nausea. I'm debating on whether I even want to read it. I don't know.
Oh, I think Nausea is really good. I would definitely recommend that. I mean, I've definitely had friends I've gotten into like a discussion with, because it's like, yeah.
Sorry, I think you cut out.
Oh yeah.
You cut out. I definitely had friends where I got in a discussion with, and then you cut out. Sorry about that.
So no, I was just saying I've gotten friends who don't think Sartre's a good writer. Okay. I've definitely critiqued him, but personally, I think he's pretty good, and I would recommend Nausea. Okay. There's just like there's some, I don't know. It's kind of cool. Like it's about this guy in this small French town trying to research his like history manuscript, which is a biography of some weird guy. Yeah. I don't remember when, and he's just kind of I don't know, but it's very much like slice of life in a certain way, which I always like that kind of stuff. And it's just this guy's angst, and he's like going to this library. There's like this is a really fun character, the autodidact, who just is trying to read every book in the library. Yeah. He's going through it all. And so it's like he's just like kind of like weirdly stuck in this library with this guy. He's got this relationship with this other woman. And he's like not getting his research project off the ground, and he's just like kind of just struggling with it. And I don't know, it's kind of cool. It's cool seeing his perspective on things. And I feel like, especially there's that famous tree scene where he's like looking at the tree and then realizing his categorization that the tree is like imposing a certain thing on the tree, and that he's getting that kind of imposed on himself by like other people, which is a good scene. So I think it's a good book. I haven't read like a ton of Sartre though. It's like I can't like go through his whole I do. My favorite one though, I would definitely recommend. There's a collection I think in English called The Wall.
The Wall. Okay.
It's a collection of short stories, and most of them I don't remember really stuck with me. There's one I think the Spanish Civil War that was a cool one, but the last one, that one I think is really good. It's called The Birth of a Leader.
All right.
That I think it's like almost a novella, and it's like I don't know, like I'll let you read it or whatever, but it goes through this one individual's kind of philosophical progression, and then they turn out to be like very not a good individual, and it's kind of very fascinating to kind of see that whole because Sartre kind of builds their entire life almost, and that was a very fascinating work for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to check that out because, yeah, like the birth of a leader, like what does that mean?
Well,
right.
he definitely. I think I don't remember it. Basically, it's got a degree of connotation. Like, yeah, I don't want to because it's like the leader has a direct connotation to like kind of World War II and stuff going on exactly at that time. So I think that I don't want to spoil exactly how it's going because it's like that's a pretty big impactful moment, but that's kind of part of it. Yeah,
I'll have to wait. I'll let the suspense build up.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah,
but that's the one I would recommend. I think I also totally recommend Nausea, but I would recommend that before.
Yeah, I actually have Nausea.
Oh, God.
Like I just recently bought that and Being in Nothingness. But I didn't realize how long Being in Nothingness is. So I'm just like, do I really want to get myself like into this right now?
Sure, yeah.
Like that's gonna take like a few months to read.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like I'll usually read like for an hour a day.
Sure, yeah.
But that's still like with like a book that size, like.
Yeah, no, it's a long project for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, I haven't done it. I mean, just I do know people that have, so it's doable.
Yeah.
And someday, hopefully, I'll get to it.
Well, I mean, it's like reading I've read all the Harry Potter books and like the Inheritance Cycle, when I was younger, and that's a lot of pages of books. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there is a difference. Harry Potter is a bit. So like I did this. I read some I think mystery novel that was like 600 pages. Like, oh wow, that was really fast. But definitely a very different experience than trying to read Sartre over like 800 pages or whatever.
Yeah, because you're you're invested in the story, and it's like, oh, like what's gonna happen next? But with like Being in Nothingness, you're not like, oh, what's gonna happen next? What is he gonna say?
Yeah, it's like, is Heidegger get brought up? Is there gonna be some existential angst? Like, what's in this chapter?
I can't take the suspense.
Well, the cool thing I think, especially since he's so influenced by phenomenology, though, is at least he has a lot of vignettes and a lot of his like way of explanation from the parts I've read tend to like rely on almost like certain kind of narrative moments, which does I think make it a lot easier than say than some like there's some big books, some big philosophy books are just like, all right, I need something concrete here because I've been reading for like 300 pages, bro.
Yeah, I mean that's how the Will to Power was pretty long.
Yeah,
that's kind of like not really super not a whole lot of continuity in Nietzsche's writings at all.
Yeah, because that one's edited too after his death, right? This edited posthumous.
Yeah. It's still pretty good, and I actually just finished reading Beyond Good and Evil. So
nice.
But yeah, I want to get into another. Cause I've been reading too much Nietzsche lately. I need to get into another, something else for a little while.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, explore.
All right, man. Well, I think we're about a little over an hour, so I think I'll give you back the rest of your day.
Oh, well, thank you.
In Kansas.
Yep. Visiting my family, Kansas. It's really hot here too.
No, dude, tell me about it. It's hot here too. In the Northwest, we're experiencing one of the largest heat waves that have ever hit the Northwest.
I heard about that. Dude, that's pretty brutal. Definitely.
Yeah, dude, it's literally been over 100 degrees every day for the past week.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm like,
because
what is going on?
Kansas is like that normally, but it's like that's kind of expected here. That's not expected
Not at all, dude.
That's
not at all.
That's unusual.
Yeah, it's brutal because like I'm used maybe an 80-degree summer like most of the time, but like this is like 20 degrees over normal.
Oh wow!
Like what's going on? Like sure, there's been days of like 100 or like maybe a week in the 90s, but like not to this extent. So
yeah, definitely speaks on like some environmental concerns as well.
Yeah,
like such drastic changes in the climate.
Yep, it's all those people imposing their ideas on others, so it's causing the heat wave now.
Yeah, no, for sure.
All right, well,
yeah,
cool. Thanks for coming on. That is
thanks for having me on. Yeah,
Mannette, everybody.